unfair consequences that are inherent in a critical enforcement of the Sexual Offences Act number 2006 and questioning imposition of some of its penal provisions, which could easily lead to a state-backed purveyance of harm, prejudice and injustice, quite apart from the noble intentions of the legislation. End of quote. And by that, they proposed lowering the sex consent age to 16 years in the Republic of Kenya. That has caused quite an uproar from Kenyans. It's a conversation that is still going on up to now, more so on social media. We've had a couple of leaders raise their concerns as well on this particular proposal by the judges. So this is the topic we're discussing tonight on The Big Story. So let me take you over to our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna, who will be speaking to a man who has been tweeting the entire day about this particular proposal by the judges. Sophia.
Good evening, Linda. So 3 judges from the Court of Appeal are proposing to reduce the age of consent from 18 to 16 years. This is not the first time we're hearing this kind of a proposal. In the past, it has flopped. Will this debate currently ongoing around the same be fruitful in as far as the proponents of it, or will there be a deadlock or perhaps a middle ground? Let's talk to one of the legislators, Makueni Senator, also the minority whip in the Senate, Mutula Kilonzo Jr. Thank you so much for making time for The Big Story. You tweeted earlier saying that we cannot go that direction. We cannot reduce the age of consent from 18 to 16.
Yes.
Why?
Because I do not understand. When you make proposals for change of law, there must be a mischief. What is the mischief that we are trying to address? What is the legal lacuna that is existing that we are trying to address? To the contrary, it is actually true that the children who are under 18, most of them are still in high school. And therefore, I do not see what exactly we are trying to address, except the mischief that a child who is 16 years old, who is below 18, cannot get married, and you cannot also seek consent. And in cases of defilement or of rape, when it's over 18, the question of consent comes into play. So as far as I'm concerned, I cannot see the mischief. There's no mischief in the law. And I'm not even sure whether judges can casually make those comments because they would have to make a proposal, which is of course a proposal, not a direction, for Parliament to reduce the age. On the floor of the House, I'm not quite sure how you would argue that. I've seen comments that in other countries and in other jurisdictions, the age of consent is actually the age of consent is 16. But people forget that the curriculum and the education system in Western world is not the same as ours. The circumstances are also not the same. The culture is not also the same. And therefore, the age of 18 has been restricted to the extent, therefore, that a child who is below 18 is considered not mature enough for purposes of consent, contracting, getting married, and any other thing that any adult would be treated as an adult.
Right.
Those are the issues.
Those are the issues. However, there's some who are arguing in a changing world, more technologically savvy, so that at very young age, you have children being able to use mobile phones, able to get onto the internet, find out things, so that it is not as things were before in as far as maturity and coming of age and understanding oneself and the issues around an individual, so that at 16, then now, is different from a 16-year-old 20 years ago, even in modern-day Kenya. Do you dispute that?
I don't know. I don't have a problem with that. Children who are 8 years, 7 years. Recently, I met a child in an innovation ceremony at Konza who won, and the boy was 7 years old. It's not their mind. It's the question, what is the mischief? What is it that we are trying to cure? What is it that we are trying to address? Are we addressing the defilement of children? Are we addressing the fact that the number of children who are engaging in sexual activity has increased, and therefore we realize that we ought to allow them to become adults? Or are we saying that a child who is 16 years old, particularly a girl, and in this case we must insist, particularly a girl, are we simply saying that this girl is mature enough, she can start her home, she can become a wife, she can get married, that sort of thing? What is the mischief? What are we saying? Have we taken a study around the country and found the Form 3s? Because most of them would be Form 2s and Form 3s. These Form 3s are they can now make decisions and see to their parents. They can contract, they can buy land. So are we making an exception in a particular case?
Okay.
Or are we making a law generally for purposes of consent? Because when you are at age of maturity, it covers everything. It's not restricted to sex and matters related to sex or any other. It's all across the board. Let's give our 16-year-olds identity cards. Let's give our 16-year-olds the right to vote. Let's give our 16-year-olds the right to comment on issues. Let's give our 16-year-olds the right to be elected. That is the point.
So let's go to where this advisory, quote-unquote, from the 3 judges of the Court of Appeal came from. That a matter was before them where they reversed a sentence of 15 years to a man who had impregnated a girl who's 17 years old. And in their judgment, and some of the debate that has ensued after that, is that there are very many young people or even older men, but, in prison with very long sentences, and that then there needs to be a relook because, according to them, even part of that judgment goes to read that this is a person who was aware of what they were doing, they were consenting, like agreeable to the same, but because of the legalese or the law in and of itself, then this man got this sentence, despite this girl having been willing and even was to pay dowry, which he was unable to raise, and that's why the matter went, before court and he was jailed. So in that spectrum, looking at it that way, do you see that argument making sense?
It doesn't make sense because if, assuming the statistics were to be carried out in Kenya as to how many 16-year-olds we have, if one 16-year-old who was in court or 17-year-old who was in court apparently knew what they were doing, consented to have sex with an adult, got pregnant and wants to get married, does that translate to all the 16-year-olds in the country are of the same mind? I've said that there's a matter we are not addressing. That is a specific case of a specific person. But did the judges, in their estimation and in the trial, interrogate the maturity or the psychology of the girl? Because it's not a question of consent. The consent to have sex with this man or the consent to get to marry this man might be an emotional decision. So we are mixing the two issues. It could be an emotional decision. It could not be based on the right status of mind. We have seen many cases, many murder cases, even prominent ones, where the suspects are taken for testing. Go and test whether this person is of sound mind. Have we done the same for our children who are 16? Do we have expert opinions? Because these judges sitting in the Court of Appeal, when did they become experts on psychology? That's what I'm talking about. They become experts on psychology to determine that, in fact, this girl wanted to get married. We are simply saying girls who are 16-year-olds do not have that mind.
But are we saying if there are quite a number, and in that ruling they mentioned jurisdictions, and you highlighted the same, that have 16 as the age of consent, are we saying ours then are not maturing as fast as the rest of the world in the modern age? Let
me explain. In Australia, they have allowed gay couples. In some parts of America, they have allowed gay couples to get married. You see, because we cannot measure ourselves and our culture with the trends that are going on in Europe. It's not normal. It's not abnormal for the LGBT group to have big parades in the city of Berlin or the city of London. That happens. But have you envisioned that happening in the country? But I've said this. There are fundamental issues arising out of this, and we cannot zero in on marriage, weddings, sex as the basis for changing this, because we must then give our 16-year-olds the right to become MPs, the right to vote, because when they can vote, they can become MPs. They can also contract, buy land and sell land. And therefore, when they're in school, you are telling them, please leave school and become an MP. So there are many fundamental issues, both cultural and issues that we have not addressed. That could be a particular case. But I've said it is what we call a fallacy of generalization. To pick one person and pick one case and generalize it. Yeah. I suspect that when that law comes here, it will not see the light of day. Yeah. Because I do not see the country agreeing, the country When we go out there to the public and ask them, do you want your 16-year-olds? Do you want your 16-year-olds to be able to marry X? Do you want your 16-year-olds to be having sex and come home and say, by the way, Dad, I agreed. Do you want that in the country? I doubt that would happen. And therefore, I think, other than the emotional issues surrounding this subject, I believe that we must, as a country, interrogate what we are talking about. What are we saying? As far as I'm concerned, the children of this country have a right to be protected to a large extent. If I was asked, I would change it from 18 to 21. If I was asked, I would change it.
Okay.
Yes.
Upwards. But this has, as you said, has come to Parliament before, and it did not succeed. And at the time, though, one of the debates and proponents for the same was talking about the Romeo and Juliet clause, in as far as the boys that are of the same age, say 16 boy, 16 girl, and agree that it is the boys then who will end up behind bars, that there needs to be a relook to how, if these young people who have come of age and have agreed or whatever, I don't know what you see at that, from that point of view.
This country for a long time, we have mismanaged our sentencing regime, the law on punishment, because I've been to Boston institutions. I've been to Boston institutions where young men have been sodomized in the process of being punished for committing a crime. So, in the modern world, the incarceration is not the only punishment that we ought to give to people of who have committed a crime. We have mismanaged this process, and at the same time saying a child who is 17 or a boy who is 17 can run away with a girl who is 15. I have cases of a boy who is 16 who has taken a girl from a school in Siakago, lived with her in Kibera, and disappeared from the network. Nobody knows. Are we saying that this has become the new normal? I'm just worried about the new normal we are setting because of the concerns of our moral teachings. We have failed in our moral teachings to our children, and now we just want to lower the threshold. We want to lower the threshold of age, we want to lower the threshold of sex, and therefore we want to make 15-year-olds in this country fair game. At some point, let me tell you, when you start with 16, at some point 12 will still be a good number. Because I'm told 12-year-olds is also fair game. We were dealing recently the cases of primary. Those are not even 14-year-olds. They are less. County of Kilifi, 17,000 girls who have not gone for the 100% transition. Why? Because they are nursing. How does that become normal? Where do you keep the balance? How do you settle this issue vis-a-vis your curriculum? Because if a child is considered a child for purposes of custody, and that child is in the hands of a teacher, and that child is 15 or 16, does that child become an adult that you can start arguing with the teacher? Those are some of the issues. And therefore, I think that even in the judges making their comments, we call them casual comments or directions, this debate will go on. But at some point, the country will have to ask very serious questions about our morality. Our morality question: are we teaching our children the right thing? Are we preaching the good things that we're supposed to do in church? What is happening to the country that all of a sudden we still think that we must relook everything? But when do you stop? From 16, do we go to 14? Or do we go to 15?
And finally, to the point you made about the pregnancies that we've seen during the national examinations last year, one of the very disturbing scenarios was that a girl gives birth, and then after there's an examination paper, they sit and yet an adult, usually even employed, with 3 months off of work to be able to take care of self and the child, then go back to work. So there's already a huge issue around that. In your view, because again, there's been passing of the buck, is it the parents that are too busy, they're not being able to spend more time, and they're passing the buck, to the schools? What needs to happen to make sure that we don't lose it completely with our children?
What I think needs to happen is that we have come to a place where we have realized we have a crisis. We are burying our heads in the sand, and instead of taking what would be the rightful action, we are now reversing ourselves and turning our backs on our children. And that's why we are saying 16 is fair game. The point is, a class 8 student gives birth, goes carrying a child to a class of 50 girls. So that one girl is showing the rest of the other 49 who are not having sex, who don't have children, that it's okay. That is not okay. It cannot be okay. Children cannot bring up children. We cannot have that sort of system. And the reason this is happening is because the men of this country have not agreed that the other men who are violating our children ought to be punished, and we ought to punish them. I've talked about the regime of punishment. The regime of punishment is not stringent enough that you can impregnate a girl and at the same time it's more stringent, say, go walk to the father and say, I'm prepared to marry your girl. I have an instance of a girl in Nairobi who was taken out of a class, from 3 class, by somebody who pretended then that he has agreed to marry the girl and the girl has agreed, out of a class. So where do you change the parameters? Are we going to also change our curriculum, education curriculum? So at the point where a girl and a boy are 16, they get out of school, and they join work life. We are all on the streets and we're all hustling. No.
Thank you very much.
Asante.
Thank you very much. Mutula Kilonzo Jr., Senator Makueni County, and the Minority Whip in the Senate, saying that this is a serious conversation. Of course, one will continue to hear sentiments across the board, but of course that proposals from the judges is not the last word, because that is a legislative affair. So will it make it to the House? We'll wait to see. Back to you, Linda.
Shouldn't see whether or not it will make it to the House. It has elicited quite a storm on social media. People from different sets of life just talking about it and saying we shouldn't allow this in the country of Kenya. First of all, we're already dealing with a lot. We can't have this conversation. So the reason why a good number of people are upset about this proposal in the first place is the frustration the lots of parents have, especially the parents of young girls, some of whom have had to drop out of school because of early pregnancies. And they're saying this is not helping. Listen into what a leader had to say on this as well.
Wasichana wengi wamepachikwa mimba wakati tulikuwa tukifanya exam. Hizi zilizopita tumegundua kwamba wasichana wengi walikuwa wamewekwa mimba. Hili ni jambo ambalo ningeliomba wazee na vijana wote waliangalie. Kwa sababu makamo ya watu kuoana inajulikana na wakamo ya watu kuingia katika vitendo vya ndoa inajulikana. Na wale wasichana wanaposhika mimba namna hii inakuwa ni matatizo kwa yule msichana mwenyewe, matatizo kwa yule mtoto ambaye yuko tumboni, na ni matatizo kwa elimu yake, na ni matatizo mpaka kwa wazazi wake.
Haya basi, ni matatizo kwa kila mtu. Matatizo kwa wazazi, matatizo kwa familia, kila mtu. Okay, let's have this conversation in studio now. We are speaking to Robert Aseda. He's from the Network for Adolescents and Youth for Africa. He's the program coordinator there. For purposes of this conversation, we were also hoping that we would be able to speak to Millie Odhiambo, who's the Suba North Member of Parliament. We're still hoping she'll make her way here. It would be important to just get her voice on this as well. But Mr. Aseda, thank you for joining us on The Big Story this evening. So your immediate thoughts to this proposal, sir?
First, I think it's a very opportune discussion that we're having at the right time, especially from the statistics and the stories that we've been hearing. I think, as the Senator said, the bigger question that we need to ask ourselves is what is the mischief here? And it is indeed true that a lot of young people are engaging in sex at a younger age, but the solution is not to lower the age of sexual consent, but instead to provide opportunities for these young people to be able to access sexuality education, to be able to access youth-friendly services, and to be able to be allowed to remain in school and to finish school. Okay.
So before we even get to this conversation, I want you to clear something up for me. Is consent age just about sex?
Definitely no. And the first thing that I think we need to look at when we're talking about consent is not just that, yes, I have agreed. Consent looks at a wider range of issues. And the first thing that we need to look at in terms of consent is the capacity. Is the person that you are saying that has given you consent has the capacity to be able to give that consent? The other thing is the issue of informed consent. Is the person able to make the right decision for themselves? And then the third and most important thing is the consent freely given. Is there, are the people in terms of the power dynamics, is the person able to give the consent? So I think we need to broaden the issue of consent. And as the Honorable Senator said, it is not just about sex. Consent, the age of consent, reducing the age of consent will mean reducing and having a lot of conversations about other issues. Currently, globally, if you look at the Convention of the Rights of the Child, it puts the age of consent to 18 globally. And there are very many reasons for that, including the cognitive capacity of these children to be able to decide for themselves and to be able to freely and consent without any form of coercion.
Okay, so you work with adolescents and you interact a lot with them. Paint for me the picture of how bad this problem is in the Republic of Kenya.
I think in Kenya we are doing very badly. I will just give you a few statistics. If you go to Google today and you look at Google Zeitgeist, for example, that gives the data on the most asked questions online, young people in Kenya are asking, what is sex? Young people in Kenya the question they are asking is how to abort. If you look at the recent Kenya Demographic Health Survey, it's telling us that there's a lot of teenage pregnancy in Kenya. It's almost, if you count 10 young people, 2 of them are pregnant. And if you look at other counties, for example, like Narok and my county, Homa Bay, this number is way, way, way higher. If you look at statistics around teenage pregnancy, for example, as a nation, we suddenly saw the real picture during the time of the examinations, but these statistics have been here for a very long time. So young people in Kenya are facing a lot of sexual and reproductive health challenges. And also, if you look at the age of sexual debut, and this is, again, one of the reasons why it is important for us to have this conversation. What is the age when young people start to engage in sex? And if you look at where we're coming from, young people as early as 9 years old,